Hey there, Lala here. I'm back with the mobile stand version of my Dream Red Light therapy setup. Between the time I couldn't use my wall mount setup, figuring out this version, and then filming and refilming, it's embarrassing how long it took me to shoot these two setup videos. The reason I'm even telling you that is because I ended up going weeks without daily red light therapy. And it was shocking to see how the disruption in red light affected me. My mood, my skin, my neck, inflammation, everything just seemed to be going downhill. It took more than a week of daily red light for me to start feeling like myself again. As crappy as I was feeling during the filming of these, there's a moment in both videos where I have the Mito Flex in my hand and I flip it on. The red light hits me in my face and it's like heaven. Anyway, I ended up putting both of those moments together, even though it's obvious one is from the wall mount setup and the other from the stand. I just thought both clips were such a good representation of how red light makes me feel. Okay, here's how I converted my wall mount setup to the mobile stand. Since the plan is to put my setup back in the closet as soon as I'm able, I didn't want to make a big investment in the stand, so I bought this used one for like 40 bucks. But whatever you decide to buy, it has to have 2 vertical posts and at least 1 horizontal post connecting them. Here are all the grid wall parts I've used in this video. Everything will be linked in the description, and I think you'll really be surprised at how inexpensive everything is. You'll also see here some support arms I'm going to be testing in the future. If you've already seen the wall mount video, you'll probably want to skip right to step 3. This is what the Mito 300 panel looks like right out of the box with the stand attached. You'll be modifying 2 of them to be the side angle panels. Step 1 is rotating the stand. With this being a square, it works out perfect to change the direction. You won't need any additional hardware for this step. You'll simply be rotating the stand and reattaching it. Now remove all 4 screws from the plastic cover. With the panel to the edge of your table, push the base down to its lowest position. If I was doing this on a hard surface, I'd put a towel down first just to protect it. Now with the stand down, you'll be able to lift the cover straight up. This piece is just plastic, so you don't want to be prying it up from one corner. Now remove all 4 screws from the metal plate. These will be easy to tell apart later because they're heavier than the other ones. And then you'll just rotate the light panel and reattach the base so it's off to the right side, towards the power switch. Put the plastic cover back on, going straight down, and put all 4 screws back in. This one will be the left-facing panel. The right-facing panel will have the stand coming off the opposite side where the cords plug in. And when you're done with the panels side by side, this is how they should look. Before we get into mounting these light panels to the grid wall, I wanted to mention that when I was editing these videos, I noticed the angle panels on the mobile stand moved whenever I moved the stand around and really required additional support. So please, if you decide to do a setup like either of mine, do watch the short clip at the end of this video to see how I was able to better support those 2 angled light panels. As you can see, the base has a wide end and a narrow end, which is how I'll be describing the sides as I'm working on them. Starting with the wide end, on a number 6 screw, put a tooth lock washer and a standard flat washer, and put it into one of the holes on the wide end of the base, and slide it to the end. Now on that same screw, above the base, place another flat washer, a split washer, and then a nut. Do the exact same thing on the other side and tighten the nuts down till they're snug. Now on the narrow end of the base, and again these 2 will be identical, on a number 6 screw, put a tooth washer and a flat washer, slide that into the holes and push it all the way forward. It'll have to balance there loose while you do the other side. This 8-inch strap is a 12-gauge galvanized steel strong tie. You'll need to drill 2 holes on each of these, 5 3/4 inch apart, so they'll line up with the screws. You're going to need a total of 8 of these. Line up the second strap with the first and push them both forward to be sure they're all the way into the end of the slot. Now place a flat washer, a split washer, and then a nut. Do the same on the other side, and then just tighten it down till it's snug. Back on the wide side, I'm adding 2 more nuts with a gap that you can see there. This is going to act as a standoff when we mount it to the grid wall. 2 more on the other side. And here's how it looks when it's ready to be mounted to the grid wall. Before we can set the grid wall in place, grab a box or something that you can use to support the bottom of the grid wall. Then set your light bases at the same height. At this point, if your dog is feeling ignored, take a cuddle break before moving on to the next step. Before we get started on this mounting hardware, take a close look at the bars on the grid wall. See how the horizontal bars are on the side of the lights and the vertical bars are on what will be the back side? It has to be this way, not only because our plates are arranged for this, but the grid wall hooks and accessories only attach correctly to the front side of the grid wall. If you get this wrong, you'll end up realizing it later and then have to undo your work to get back to this point so you can correct it. Now, as for where the lights are mounted, first, the wide end of the base needs to be off the grid wall. Center the edge of the grid wall between the 2 sets of screws. Narrow side on the grid wall, wide side off. Okay, now the hardware. Here's where you'll use 2 more of those 8-inch straps with the holes drilled 5 3/4 inches apart. And these are the 12-inch 12-gauge steel straps, although I think the 8-inch straps would have worked just fine here as well. On these, drill 2 holes 2.5 inches apart, so they line up with the screws that already have the plates to the wide side screws that are off the grid. Now on each screw, put a flat washer, a split washer, and lastly a nut. The nuts on the grid wall on the narrow side need to be tightened down really snug. But these ones that are off the grid wall, we're just going to lightly tighten those for now. The nut underneath the strap needs to be turned all the way up to meet the strap before you completely tighten this top side down. And to create this standoff, now you'll wind that second nut underneath the strap up to meet the first one. Hopefully this close-up in the info panel with the grid wall in its upright position gives you a better idea of what that looks like. The stripe lines are showing you where the grid wall is, and then those red ones are showing you where the gap is. Before I mount this to the mobile stand, I took a piece of this 1/4 inch tubing, split it down the middle, and ran it across the bottom. Now just center it on the stand, clamp it in place, and put heavy-duty zip ties all the way down. And be sure to put zip ties across any horizontal bars. But don't tighten it down completely just yet. Putting this thing together and taking it apart so much has given me a chance to try different things. The light panels just barely fit on the 4-inch hooks, and that's for the wall-mounted version. The mobile stand needs more space for the cords. So here I've taken one of my 4-inch hooks and hammered the end out to make a 5-inch straight hook. These worked fine, but I think I'm still going to recommend the regular 6-inch hook. I put vinyl tubing on all my hooks. Not only does it protect the light panels from being scratched, but it's also a little more grippy. Here you'll see why we didn't completely tighten those zip ties. Make sure you're putting the hooks where the horizontal and the vertical bars meet. That's what these notches are for. You'll probably have to lift your grid wall to get the hooks to fit under that bottom bar. Once you have all 4 of these hooks in place for the 1500 panels to rest on, now it's time to tighten down all the zip ties. Before standing the light panels on the grid wall hooks, connect them together with these 5-inch straps. You'll need to drill holes in those straps that are 3 1/8 inch apart to line up with the holes on your light panels. I probably would have spread the 2 middle straps out so one wouldn't have to be notched, and maybe to have them spread out more evenly, but my husband thought it should be this way, and I can't really remember why. Whenever I can get an extra pair of hands, I just say thank you. Anyway, do it however you think is best. Oh, and just between us, I also would have tightened down these screws completely before putting the panels in place. I don't know why wiggle room would be necessary. Okay, moving on. Once the panels are in place, clamp them to the stand if you're going to be moving the stand at all, like I was. Even if you're not moving the stand around, be sure to put the 2 cables on that came with your light panels and connect them to the grid wall. They're just a safety measure while you're plugging in the power cords. At this point, you'll also have to take that clamp off. Is it just me, or anytime you see circles and arrows, you feel like there should be a paragraph explaining what each one is? Nah, you're probably all too young to know the Alice's Restaurant reference. Okay, never mind. Before actually mounting the 1500 panels to the mobile stand, you have to put the power cord and linking cables in place. As you can see, I come in at an angle to make sure the cord doesn't get kinked. First, I'm plugging in the power cord to the panel that will be on my right, where I want my main switch to be. See how I have to lean the light panel out to be able to reach in there? That's why those cables needed to be in place. Now I'm attaching the first linking cable. This next linking cable should be plugged in too, even if you're not going to be linking other panels to it just yet. I like to be able to change up how my array works, so I'll want access to this one, because you won't be able to reach the socket once the panel's mounted. Now we're finally ready to mount the lower light panels. At this point, you'll need to put the clamp back on with some kind of spacer between 1 3/8 and 1.5 inches. I used a piece of scrap 1.5 by 1.5, which is technically 1 3/8. Leave this in place till you're completely done mounting the light panels to the grid wall. What I'm using are these 12-inch 20-gauge galvanized steel straps. You can use a heavier gauge if you want. You need 8 of these. You also need 8 M6 1x50 screws, 8 M6 hex nuts, and 16 1/4-inch flat washers. Through all 12 straps, you'll need to drill 2 holes 4 3/4 inches apart, so it lines up with the holes on the 1500 panels. Then line up the straps, one on the front of the grid wall and one on the back. Put your screw with the flat washer on it through the 2 straps, connecting them to the grid wall. Then another flat washer and a nut. Do the exact same thing on the bottom. And with everything tightened down, it should look like this. Take a close look at the info panel on the right there. See how all the hardware is sandwiching the grid wall between the 2 plates? Creating a standoff for the panels as well as mounting it to the grid wall. Repeat that 3 more times so there's a set of brackets on each panel. Now we're completely done mounting the 1500 panels and ready to move on to the next step. The 300 center panel needs brackets on the back to attach to the grid wall. I used 2 3/4-inch 18-gauge roof truss ties. I was planning on attaching them with the screws that held the metal base in place, but I took that off like 9 months ago, so I'm not sure what I did with them. Anyway, these 4mm 0.7 by 10 screws work just fine. Oh, and I put mine in the lower holes because I like to be able to angle my panel down just a tiny bit, but you can put the brackets in the top holes if you like. Here I'm using those same 4-inch hooks that I straightened to make 5 inches. Now just place the 300 panel on the hooks where the center grid wall bar can just slide between those 2 brackets on the back. To secure the brackets to the grid wall, I used a screw and nut from a combo pack I already had, even though the screw is longer than it needs to be. It's a number 8 32 by 1 inch. Push the screw in the slot, put the nut on, and tighten it down. I set up my array so I can power them all on with one switch, even if they're not linked together. The extension cords I used were one with an inline power switch and another that included a USB and USB-C port for charging the MitoFlex. The first thing I'm doing here is loosening the bracket of the 300 panel just so I can get behind it to hide the cords. I'm going to speed through this a bit. You can slow it down if you need to see it in real time. The inline power cord plugs into the extension cord that goes into the wall. This one says Cyber Power on it, I guess because it has the USB and USB-C ports. Then all your light panel cords are going to plug into this one with the inline power switch. And this is the charging cable for my MitoFlex. I haven't been able to find out much information about what settings are best for different parts of the body, so I still change up how my array works, trying different settings. I'd really like to know what body parts respond better to infrared versus near infrared. I'm hoping Alex Fergus or Penn Smith will post something on that. If I'm able to learn more, I'll either do a follow-up video or hopefully be able to post a link in the description to a video from someone who's an authority on the subject. I have two options to show you for the overhead light holder, but this is the one I'm using now, so I'll show this to you first. To make it easy to hang, I just attached it to a grid wall hook with a couple of screws. The hook part came off easily with a hacksaw. And here it is, my final panel. The Mito Flex. And the cherry on top of my dream setup. It's like showering in red light. Here's another overhead panel holder that simply clamps on. It has a lot of height adjustability that the other version doesn't, although it's very stiff and hard to adjust, which is probably why the faux leather tore the first time I adjusted it. But you have to clamp it like this, otherwise it won't stay in place. So the back of the clamp has to be over the horizontal bar, and the other part of the clamp has to be on a vertical bar. Otherwise this thing just will not stay. And as you can see, it's pretty bouncy, but as long as it's clamped like that, it'll be secure. No matter what kind of holder you buy, if the clamp has gaps in it like this, like most of them will, those need to be filled to make sure your light panel is held really secure. There's barely any surface area touching the light panel. It's really only that little plastic piece at the top. Look how easily this falls out. So here's what you do so that won't happen. See this little pad right here? That's got to come out. It's keeping us from having just a little bit more clamping area, and it's not doing us any good here. So I'm going to pull it off and use it to fill the gaps. I'm using alien tape because it's thick, double-sided, and sticks really well. I ended up putting a small piece of just alien tape right in this space to fill it in better. And then here's the larger piece. That'll give us a good surface area and cover all the plastic. Now let's take this for a spin, shall we? That thing's not going anywhere. Okay, if you're doing either of my setups, you better be watching this part. Luckily these stands are really stiff, and I always support them if I have to move the panel around. It seemed to be enough for the wall-mounted version in my closet, but they're not meant to be held this way, so you really have to add this support. See, the panel has to be supported way out here. The support didn't end up being in the right place if I hung it how it's supposed to be, centered on a vertical post, so I had to put it here. Like with all my other hooks, this is one I already had. It was a hat holder, but I cut the little end portion off so I could just have a straight bar. I'm going to look into getting some other long supports, and if I find something better, it'll be posted in the description. See how it goes down? I need it to be up some more, so I added some silicone tubing that I spliced in half. In fact, I ended up putting 2 layers here. And that ended up being just right. Please let me know in the comments if I need to clarify or correct anything, so I can fix it in the description or add it to a future video. And I hope you'll support my channel with a like and subscribe.